putting the bacteria into the spotlight.
Mm.
And actually, we need to step back from that a little bit. The bacteria are certainly really important, but actually, what is your body doing? What's your immune system doing? How is your health as a whole?
Today, I'm chatting with Kate Waters, a holistic intimate health specialist, nutritional therapist, and behavioral change coach. She supports people living with bladder, vaginal, and vulval conditions, taking an integrative, whole body approach that recognizes the connections between the microbiome, hormones, nervous system, and daily habits. She aims to offer a safe and supportive space where people can feel heard, equipped, and able to reconnect with hope and confidence in their body's ability to heal. Thanks so much for taking the time to share your expertise with us.
Thank you for having me.
We had a lot of questions, which we always do when we're talking about non-antibiotic approaches and just the whole body system around UTI. First, I'd love to hear more about your background and how you came to focus on this space.
Sure. So I was a chef originally. So I was a chef for around about 23, 24 years. And those last few years, I was qualifying to be a nutritional therapist. And the reason that happened was because I found out that I was celiac. And at the same time, I was cooking for a selection of people. I was a private chef at that time and cooking in different people's houses. And I was working with one lady whose husband was diabetic, another lady who she had cancer.
Mhm.
And there was this sort of running thread behind all of this that food could maybe make us sick or make us better.
Mhm.
And so I trained in nutritional therapy thinking I would go on cooking. But by the end of 3 years of studying, I absolutely knew that this is what I wanted to do. And then fast forward a few years after I qualified, a friend of mine, I always was very interested in women's health and that side of things, thought I might specialize in fertility. And then a friend of mine who'd been working with bladder clients via an acupuncturist, she handed me 3 clients and a talk to do for a charity because she was going abroad. And I just loved it. And I'd already been working with her on some of these cases. We'd talked to each other about problems that had come up and, just case study stuff, supporting each
Mhm.
other. So I understood what was needed. And I understood what was needed, particularly around bladder clients and the fear that was going on with them, because I'd heard her talking so much about her clients. So it wasn't like something completely new to me. I was sort of ready for it. And I just threw myself into learning about vaginal health and the bladder health of what was known back then, which was 2018. We'd only known for about 4 years that the bladder
Mhm.
wasn't sterile. So, it was quite limited in terms of
Yeah.
research then. But there was so much coming out about the vaginal microbiome and that side of things. So, yeah, so it was 2018 when I started working with intimate health clients. And for the last, since about 2022, that's all I see now is intimate health clients in
Mhm.
my clinic.
And it's been kind of cool to see that transformation from our side too, because you and I have been in touch for quite a few years and you've helped a lot of people in our community. And there is a great interest in things that people can do to support antibiotic therapy or to move away from that when they feel ready. And so, one of the things that comes up a lot is how antibiotics and the UTI space really revolve around the whole body connection. So, if we could start with an explanation of how the gut bladder vagina connection actually works and how disruption in one of those might affect the others.
Sure. So first of all, I think it's really important that we think about the anatomy that's all being held in the pelvis. We have the bladder, the vagina, and the gastrointestinal tract, and they are all there up close and personal, divided by their own anatomy, but also by myofascia, which is a kind of membrane that sits between them and allows them to glide so that they don't stick to each other as we move. So anything that's going to be going on in one, when it's right up next door, some inflammation or irritation is potentially going to affect the thing next door to it as well. Now, just because you have gut issues doesn't automatically mean you're going to have UTI issues. And just because you have a UTI or other bladder issue doesn't automatically mean it's because it started in the gut. But there is a strong link between all of these. And we have to remember as well that the body is connected. It's not just these separate parts. And I think medicine does tend to think about, we look at the bladder and you see a urologist, we look at the vagina and you see a gynecologist. And although that is starting to move more forwards with urogynes, there is this very separate components that need working on separately. But when we're looking at it holistically, we're thinking about what can be going on between all of these. And the microbiome, there will be some connection between them. There can also be almost no connection between them as well, which makes it difficult.
Hmm.
But certainly, if we have inflammation going on, or dysbiosis, an imbalance of bacteria in one site, that can really impact other sites as well. So UTIs may be overgrown bacteria that's normal to the bladder, or it may be that it's coming from the gut or from the vagina. We can think of the vagina as being a reservoir sometimes for bacteria that are then causing UTI issues, because we know that bacteria does translocate from both these other sites to the
Hmm.
urethra. But UTIs can also just be an overgrowth of specific microbes that are normal in the bladder.
Hmm.
It's there's so much new research coming out about all of this, and we are just at the edge of a precipice of understanding what's really going on in there. So I think it's really important that we remember that when we don't know everything. We don't even know everything about the gut, and we've had decades of
Hmm.
research going
Yeah.
into that. And it keeps changing all the time. They also share a mucosal ecosystem as well.
Hmm.
So if you have disruption to the gut epithelial lining, that may be because of bacteria, but it may also be down to nutrient deficiencies or inflammation or an inflammatory diet causing it. There may also be disruption to the epithelial lining, so the skin membrane of the bladder or the vagina as well. It's not always just bacterially driven.
Hmm.
And obviously, we know that antibiotics and diet itself and stress can cause microbiome imbalances through all of these sites as well.
Well, that's a good time to go into the next question, which is how diet plays a role in prevention and management of UTI.
So I always think about nutrition as being like the foundation layer of health. Everything else will work better if you have a good nutritional foundation, because it's the ingredients our body needs for building and repair, but also for the immune system to be reactive or not too reactive over things, for our nervous system to be soothed and calm. We need these cofactors that come in as well. So we obviously have vitamins and minerals and the big players like proteins, fats, and carbohydrates. But we have these other things called cofactors, which we can live without, but we wouldn't be very well without them. And they function as activating pathways to be optimized. So there's various different things that we get from food, and I think we're very disconnected from how food is actually
Hmm.
so important for our bodies. We're made up of the food that we eat.
I personally have found that changing my diet has been very helpful for my bladder symptoms and for my endometriosis symptoms and all of that. But it's really hard sometimes to pinpoint what you eat and how that affects your symptoms because it's not a quick reaction. I can't change my diet now and then half an hour later, I'm like, that food reacted in that way. So, are there specific foods that we should be focusing on or that multiple people might benefit from, or things that we should typically avoid if we have bladder symptoms?
So I think the basis for everybody, because obviously it's really important to think about the individual, as you've just said, your bladder, your endometriosis, they're
Hmm.
going to use very specific things. But when we think about everybody, everyone should be eating a whole foods diet. That is the key to health. This is anti-inflammatory in nature. It's low in processed foods, low in sugar, hopefully not very many ready-made meals. Now, obviously, we all sometimes need to eat something out of a packet. It's not like we should
Hmm.
be making everything from scratch and growing every vegetable in our garden, but it's about limiting these foods that are pre-made and are processed and full of E numbers and salt and sugar and all the preservatives, all these other things. We want a diet that's high in the amount of vegetables we're taking in different
Hmm.
colors and variety, different fruits coming in as well, preferably eating seasonal if we can. Good quality proteins and healthy fats from fish, eggs, nuts, and seeds, but then also thinking about fats from things like olive oil as well, and then
Hmm.
complex carbohydrates, so unrefined grains, so brown rice, wholemeal flour, that sort of thing. So it's not a strict diet, it's just a healthy one. And that it goes across the board, I think, for any health condition at all. Then when we start thinking more into the bladder, and what might be going on there, we want to think about foods that maybe have an antimicrobial or immune supporting component to them. So
Hmm.
things like garlic, ginger, herbs like oregano, thyme, cinnamon. All of these have these beautiful compounds that can be supportive. And herbs they're not like an antibiotic going in. So when I talk about something being antibacterial, it's not doing just one thing.
Hmm.
it goes and it has a multifaceted approach in the body. So we're supporting, for instance, garlic will support your immune system. It will work as an antimicrobial. It will feed your gut microbiome and so much more. So it's never just doing one thing. Cruciferous vegetables are fantastic. They are such a nutrient dense food source. So we're thinking about broccoli, cauliflower, but also rocket, watercress, and
Hmm.
radishes are within this cruciferous bracket. There's a huge long list of them beyond sort of the cabbage family. And they contain something called sulforaphane, which needs to be activated first of all. It's activated by being chopped or by being chewed by our mouth.
Hmm.
And this sulforaphane is a major antioxidant. It lowers inflammation in the body. And I think we want to be really consuming cruciferous vegetables every single day wherever possible, preferably at every meal if we can. And that's quite easy to do with something like rocket and watercress and
Hmm.
radishes, having in the fridge and just having a little side salad of these things. Because raw is when we're going to get the most sulforaphane coming through. It can be made to be heat stable, but you've got to chop it and then leave it for 60 odd minutes for the sulforaphane to become heat stable. And then you've got to cook it super quick, like no more than a couple of minutes of steaming or a light stir fry before it gets denatured. So I always just try and get my clients to add in raw where possible. So that can be from
Hmm.
slaws. You know, if you're going for a snack in the fridge, grabbing some broccoli and some hummus, raw broccoli and hummus is a great one, or radishes and hummus. Um, so there's ways of getting that in as well, but cruciferous is like a big one on the list that I try to get all my clients to be consuming.
Something that comes up every now and then is meat and the antibiotics and hormones used in the meat industry, and whether eating things like chicken could actually be increasing the risk of UTI. Do you have any insights to share there?
So funnily enough, I just read an article on this morning.
Yeah.
It seems to be coming round again.
Yeah.
So let's just take a step back. You know, it's not the chicken that's the problem, it's the bacteria. It's
Mhm.
the poor farming methods that are being used with the chicken, the mass farming that's going on where they're then having to pump them full of antibiotics. They're getting antibiotic resistance. So I think first of all, knowing where your meat has come from, and this is kind of I was going to say almost elitist thing to be able to say that I
Yeah.
can afford to have good quality meat, but we can eat less meat and
Hmm.
make sure that the meat that we do eat is good quality. I go to a farmer to buy some of my meat so that I kind of boycott the supermarkets, and you know we buy half a beef half a cow at a time and put
Hmm.
it in the freezer. But it's not always possible to do that, and I completely understand that. But we can still eat less meat. I'm not anti-meat in any way. I think we probably should be eating meat. We are designed to, but that's not really up for debate. But in terms of eating less, yes, we don't need to be eating it every single day, but making sure we've got good quality. So catching a UTI via chicken, I think it was E. coli that was being found in the
Hmm.
chicken, and they found it in the local supermarkets in the area that these UTIs were coming out in. But it's down to the bacteria again. So poor handling of the raw meat and then potentially touching the urethra with dirty hands. Now,
Hmm.
I know from every bladder client I've ever had that they are fastidious about how they clean themselves. So this is
Yeah.
very unlikely
Yeah.
to occur in this demographic. But then it's catching sort of consuming this E. coli so that it is in the gut and maybe becoming pathogenic there, or is a pathogenic form of E. coli. And
Hmm.
then that is translocating from the anus to the urethra and causing UTIs that way. But we know that this is a form of how lots of people catch UTIs, that it
Hmm.
is gut microbiome that is translocating and causing the problem there. But it comes back down to what's the body doing? What's the immune system doing? What are the host defenses doing? Like we should be able to, in the same way that we might eat food that has E. coli in it, our stomach acid should be first point of defense. You know, we have enzymes in our mouth that's going to break it all down. Stomach acid will potentially kill off that bacteria.
Hmm.
Yes, we may get some into the gut, but then our immune system should take over as well there. So if we are low in those nutrient defenses that we need, then maybe that's where then it starts taking hold and potentially might turn into a UTI. So I think we need to step back from it just being about bacteria
Hmm.
and thinking about the body as a whole rather than, oh, it's just this bad bacteria, these bad bugs that we've got to kill off.
Before we step back from bacteria altogether, let's talk about another type of translocation of organisms. The question comes up a lot about transference of organisms between partners during intimacy. How could that influence UTIs?
I mean, if we kiss somebody, we're sharing we are covered in bacteria.
Hmm.
We have more bacteria than we have cells. So if you have a bath after your partner, you're going to be sharing bacteria. If you cook a meal for somebody, you're sharing bacteria, no matter how many times you wash your hands beforehand. So yes, there is always going to be this sharing of microbes. Again, it comes to the host defenses. Now, there are things that are a bit more specific with sexual intercourse. When we think about seminal fluid, the pH of the seminal fluid is much higher than the vaginal microbiome. The vaginal pH is. So the seminal pH is around about 7.2 and above. It can go up over 8.5, but generally it's about sort of 7.2 to 8.2. Whereas the vaginal pH, which is created by our lactobacillus microbes there, is around about 3.8 to
Hmm.
4.5. So a much more acidic environment. So we're putting in something quite alkaline, and it can take about 3 days for the vagina to come back to a normal, healthy acidic space. So we have that going on. There is obviously also bacteria within the seminal fluid, both from the bladder, because the urethra and the where the semen come out of is exactly the same tube at the end point.
Hmm.
So we have both urinary and seminal bacteria mixed up in there, which is coming into the vagina. So there's that. There is also the smushing of tissue that goes on as
Hmm.
well. So, it's quite an impactful activity. And
Definitely.
that can shift and break tissue. And if there's any fragile tissue going on, if there's any disruption that's happening, that may also either release bacteria that are intracellular, release biofilms that are there, or it may just kind of cause sort of bruising to the tissue and if the tissue is fragile, kind of breaking it's the wrong word, but kind of I can't think of the word to describe it, but causing a sort of irritation to it
Hmm.
slightly.
The smushing of tissue is more obvious when it comes to that kind of transference as well. But a couple of people asked about other things in the bathroom. You mentioned having a bath after someone, but what about sharing things like loofahs or towels or other personal hygiene products? Is that going to increase the risk of transfer as well?
So there's a really awful research paper. I say awful just in terms of its
Yeah,
like subject matter. It's
I can
pretty
imagine.
disgusting. They researched, I think it was 100 students, and there was 50 toothbrushes they looked at and 50 towels they looked at. Now remember, they are students. I think that's quite important too. Sure, there's
Yeah,
some very clean
noted.
students out there, but generally they're going to be living first time away from home, maybe not quite as clean as they are when they were living at home or later on in life. But they were looking for E. coli and Staphylococcus aureus, I believe, and the towels, I think, all had E. coli on them. And
Delightful.
98% of the toothbrushes did as well. Now, not everybody, though, that brushes their teeth has a UTI or suddenly ends up with an E. coli overgrowth. So I think we have to again remember that we are made up of bacteria. Bacteria is everywhere. I think there's a lot of that can be said for these adverts that sort of, this antibacterial spray kills
Hmm.
98% of bacteria, but what about the other 2%? Actually, it's about the balance that's going on here. So, yes, potentially, if you are sharing a toothbrush with your partner who has an oral microbiome issue, or even your flatmate who has an oral microbiome issue,
Hmm.
you may possibly transfer some bacteria over into your mouth. Now, if you have a good, strong, robust immune system and good oral health, you may just be able to fight that off anyway, and you wouldn't even notice that. Or
Hmm.
it might be a low-level thing that starts to grow and eventually turns into something like gingivitis or some other problem in the mouth, because we know that the oral microbiome, there's now tests as well to look in the
Hmm.
mouth of the microbes there. And again, it's full of different bacteria. Um, so yes, there can be an issue with sharing a towels, but I wouldn't say that it's automatically causing a UTI. You use your partner's towel, you get a UTI. I don't think that's probably what caused the UTI, but there is definitely some sharing that does come across of it. But I think again, we're putting the bacteria into the spotlight,
Hmm.
and actually, we need to step back from that a little bit. The bacteria are certainly really important, but actually, what is your body doing? What's your immune system doing? How is your health as a whole, first of all?
So we can move on to how to support the immune system, but still talking about bacteria. What's the latest research in probiotics for UTI prevention?
So I think, this is just unfolding all the time in front of us. But lactobacilli do seem to be beneficial both in the vagina and in the bladder. And that's certainly what I focus on clinically. Working on the vaginal microbiome, first of all, we have so much more research around this
Hmm.
space as well, but it does seem to improve the bladder microbiome for most people. And back before we had access to next generation sequencing testing or PCR for the bladder, I was just working with vaginal microbiome tests and still doing really well with that, shifting
Hmm.
and changing the vaginal microbiome, working orally on the bladder. All that's changed now is that we have maybe slightly more targeted approaches because we can see what bacteria is going on a little
Hmm.
bit more clearly in the bladder there. So I think generally for UTI prevention, thinking about the vaginal microbiome and lactobacillus strains, and there's some lovely products out there that encompass all of this and are aimed at women's health, and they are generally keeping up to date with the latest research and creating formulas for that, but it is ever changing.
What's your take on whether you should take oral probiotics or vaginal probiotics when you're trying to support the bladder?
So it's a tricky one, isn't it? I mean, does anything oral reach the bladder? Yes, of course we
That's the
know it
question.
does, but we know that antibiotics do. We know that Hiprex does. I found a research paper where garlic, because I was looking at trying to work out if garlic compounds would reach the bladder, and
Mm,
in the research paper it stated that it took about 8 hours of garlic being consumed for the allicin to, which is the compound that we're looking at for the immune support and the antimicrobial support, to actually reach the bladder. So we know that these things do reach the bladder.
hmm.
Um, with probiotics, though, the thing we're thinking about with them is that it's a transitory effect that they have. They're not coming in and colonizing the space. That's what they
Hmm.
can, but it's rare that that happens. It's more that they are moving through and they're talking to other bacteria via something called quorum sensing, which is their sort of communication method. And in that, when Lactobacillus crispatus, for instance, let's just take that one as an example, recognizes that there are more of its type around or similar to it, it will then feel it's safe to start proliferating and growing in number. So they're having this transitory effect. So is it that once it's in the gut and it's allowing this quorum sensing to this signaling to go out, that it allows more bacteria to flourish of that type in
Hmm.
the bladder? Or is it moving from translocation? We aren't quite sure, but there is definitely research that shows that these strains do get to the bladder and to the vagina by taken orally. I do like to use vaginal probiotics where possible in
Hmm.
clinic because I think if we're going directly to an area where it hasn't got to go from the gut, it's we're accessing that. But in terms of the bladder, we can hope that they're going to translocate. We can hope that that sensing might be a little more close up and therefore actually like crossing the barrier. But I think that, it does seem to make a difference when we impact the vagina in that way, that
Hmm.
it affects the bladder as well.
We do hear from a lot of people that have found probiotics to be helpful. Do you think there's a danger that some probiotics could actually cause UTIs if you use them too much?
So I think we need to be careful with anything using it too much. There's overuse of everything,
Hmm.
which can lead to overgrowth of things. So certainly, care around anything you're taking, from antimicrobials to probiotics, the lot of anything that I think you're putting in. I think it's quite rare to see a probiotic cause a UTI. Like anything, you can find research to back up both sides. There's always a research paper out there somewhere that will state that something has
Hmm.
happened. Clinically, I see them being really beneficial. We need to be cautious around anyone who's immunocompromised, anyone who's frail and elderly, and also
Hmm.
neonates, certainly. But I think what we need to think about is why might a probiotic be triggering UTI symptoms? So when we think about lactobacillus, it has a natural anti-biofilm or biofilm disrupting mechanism to it. If biofilms break down because we're putting in more lactobacillus, we might get more UTI symptoms. So it's not actually the lactobacillus causing the UTI,
Hmm.
it's creating a situation where the bacteria are released out into the bladder and perhaps causing more symptoms there. I have had a client come through to me who had been consuming a product called Saccharomyces. It was a Saccharomyces cerevisiae she was taking, but there's also Saccharomyces boulardii as well. And there is quite a bit of research around it causing vaginitis. And I am now much more
Hmm.
cautious around this because it had taken up residence in the vagina and was potentially causing a lot of her vaginal symptoms. We managed to sort the bladder stuff out relatively quickly compared to actually rectifying the vaginal symptoms in the end. So maybe, but maybe not. I think again, it's like what's actually going on with that probiotic rather than it being the probiotic as being a direct cause, an overgrowth of that specific strain that then is causing a problem.
It's interesting about the Saccharomyces because I know that is often recommended to people who have a candida issue to help treat that. So something to keep in mind, I guess, that hasn't really come up before.
But also, I've had clients who have done really well taking it. So I'm
Yeah.
just a little bit more cautious with it now in clinic rather than using it as much as I used to. But
Yeah,
that's life,
it's
isn't
good to
it? We
have that in
evolve.
mind. Yeah.
Yeah, we evolve and we change with the latest research and what we find out about.
Mhm.
And that's how things should always shift forwards.
And we have a lot of conversation about E. coli in the gut and in the bladder. I know there are good strains of E. coli in the gut, so they're considered commensal or healthy. Are there natural approaches that you would take to help to decrease the amount of E. coli in the gut if it's causing symptoms in the bladder as well?
So, first of all, always remembering that just because you have an overgrowth of something in the gut doesn't automatically mean it's
Hmm.
going to be causing the problem in the bladder as well. But yes, if there is, for instance, in the gut, if E. coli is causing diarrhea, for instance, loose stools, bloating, then yes, it does need to be worked on. So, the best remedies really for it quite often are actually overcrowding it with beneficial
Hmm.
bacteria and supporting it from that way. So an overgrowth of E. coli quite often will occur because of low beneficial microbes. So we want to support that side of things. We want to think about the secretory IgA, which is our first sort of line of defense in our mucous membrane that runs from our mouth. It's up our nose as well. So all of the gastrointestinal tract right down to the anus. Secretory IgA is kind of the first thing that the anything coming in comes into contact with. And if that is low, that may be allowing a more of an overgrowth to happen. If there's gut inflammation or dysbiosis there, then maybe, yes, we need to work on that. Things like garlic works quite well with E.
Hmm.
coli, cranberry, GOS, which is a prebiotic fiber that you can take. It is extracted from dairy, so some people with dairy allergies can't use it. Lactobacillus strains and also some bifidobacterium strains that can help to bring that E. coli back into balance a little bit.
Okay, and what about biofilms in the bladder? Do you have approaches that you use to disrupt those?
So biofilms are an interesting one. We need to remember that biofilms are natural within
Mm-hmm.
nature. They're not something that is only found in the bladder. We find them in the gut. We find them in running streams. When you look at a stone covered in that green kind of gloopy algae type thing, that's quite often a biofilm with all the
Mm-hmm.
bacteria held underneath it. We also know that within biofilms, there's generally mixed bacteria in there as well. It's not just one bacterial strain that will be in there. So this extracellular matrix that they create around them acts a bit like a sort of glue. It blocks antibiotics and the immune system being able to get in. But also within there, the biofilms sort of create a community where they can, via this quorum sensing communication that they have, they can tell each other about antibiotic resistance and how to kind of create that within bacteria that didn't have it beforehand. So they can kind of coordinate defense between them all. So breaking them down, well, they will break down naturally of their own accord at some point. I tend to not go in with a lot of these big biofilm disruptors just because they're hugely expensive.
Mm-hmm.
And I use, so lactobacillus, as I mentioned, has a natural biofilm breaking component to it. And NAC does as well. And I use NAC, N-acetylcysteine, a lot in clinic because, first of all, for its biofilm breaking formation that it can have, but
Mm-hmm.
also it can be really helpful in supporting. It's a precursor to something called glutathione, which is a major antioxidant, so it mops up oxidative damage and inflammation in the body, but it can also help the liver to process. Medications and things like that as well. So it's a really useful one to be going in. So they're what I call like little biofilm disruptors that I'm
Mm-hmm.
using anyway in clinic. But there are definitely enzymes out there that you can buy. So things like nattokinase, and I think there's some blends, isn't there? Like Pure Defense and other ones like
Mm-hmm.
that. They are very, very expensive though. So in some cases, it's really useful to use them for sure.
Mm-hmm.
But quite often, I find if we really start working on breaking down the biofilms, we actually end up with more symptoms.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to think about, is that what that person can tolerate? Because sometimes they can't.
Makes
So
sense.
yeah, we just need to kind of think about it in, how are we going to address this? And certainly it's useful to be having something going in that is working on that, but do we need to put one of these very expensive products in alongside as well?
When someone takes enzymes like that, is it necessary to take them without food so that they don't then act on the food in the gut?
Yeah, absolutely. It will break down the proteins that you've just eaten rather than actually going and working on anything that you want it to in the body. So yes, they need to be taken on an empty stomach.
And is there evidence that those types of enzymes make it through to the bladder?
Oh, I'm not sure about that, to be honest with you. I'd have to go and research that. But I know that there's a lot of practitioners who are using it. I
Mm.
presume that they have researched that. We know that the lactobacillus definitely makes it through because we've seen that in research with oral. Well, it was
Hmm.
making it through to the vagina. So again, we can make presumptions that it's going to make it through to the bladder again.
Hmm.
The bladder's difficult. We can't just get in there easily.
Yeah.
We have to go in through a tiny little hole that doesn't want things to go in that
Hmm.
way. The vagina is a lot easier to sample. When we're looking at any kind of urine test, for instance, we know that there is going to be contamination. It's almost
Yeah.
impossible not to have any contamination from the skin coming out of the urethra or from the microbiome, the vaginal microbiome discharge that's going to be there as well. No matter how much you clean beforehand, there is going to be some contamination. So unless someone's going in and actually biopsying or using a catheter, and even then are they dragging, other
Hmm.
bacteria in with it. So it's really hard to say, I think, on that.
It would be great for more research to be done in that space because the question comes up quite a bit from the patient community. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you found this expert video helpful. If you'd like to learn more about this or related topics, be sure to check out our other videos or head over to liveUTIfree.com for related articles. We'll drop some links in the video description. If you like what we're doing on this channel, you can support our work by hitting subscribe here on YouTube, and don't forget to tick the bell so you'll be notified of our future videos. Thanks again for watching, and until next time, keep asking questions and pushing for better solutions.